Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Chris Hagedorn, the CFS Secretary. It's nice to see you all here. We have 52 of our colleagues with us so far, 53. And we are waiting for the rapporteur, His Excellency Yaya Olaniran, to join us. He has indicated just before the call that he has an obligation to be on a call with his head of state, and will be with us in about 5 to 10 minutes. So we will be started on the agenda you've all seen in just a few moments. We also welcome the chair of CFS, Mr. Tanawat Tian Sin, who we'll hand the floor to in just a moment to make some opening remarks on this work stream, which is, as you know, an open-ended working group on agroecological and other innovative approaches. So again, thank you. We have little time to rest and recover from a very busy CFS 47 and negotiations that led to the successful adoption of the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. And so again, thank you all. This is a chance for us to reconvene after quite a long delay since our last informal meetings. We had 6 of them, summaries of which are posted on the website. And I see our rapporteur is here. So welcome, Yaya. We'll hand the floor to the CFS chair and to you in just a moment. Glad you could make it in shorter time than expected. So just a little bit of house cleaning as well. We will be recording today's session, and I'll ask our secretary to do that. That will be the link to which we will post on our website, along with comments that we have received on draft 1. This is the negotiating document that many of you will recall we finalized last year in anticipation of negotiations starting during the late spring, early summer. That had to be postponed due to COVID and the complications of doing all the work that we needed to get done last year. So we will start shortly. We will be recording the call. We also have the benefit, thank you to CSM, of Spanish to English, English-Spanish translation, which is available in the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. We also would remind you, as with all Zoom calls, please keep your microphones off and your cameras on to avoid distractions and to have everyone's hopefully visible for making comments when they wish. So with no further ado, let me hand the microphone to our CFS chairperson, Tanawat Tian Sin. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris, CFS Secretary, for your introduction. And also I would like to welcome all participants, colleagues, and also our chair of the open-ended working group on agroecological and other innovative approach. But sometimes we also call as a rapporteur, whatever I prefer to call chair. Thank you, Ambassador Yaya, to be with us, even though today he has a tight schedule, and also would like to thank our secretariat as well. If you remember last year, when we have a COVID-19 outbreak, at the beginning we were struggling with the virtual negotiation, but until today we are familiar with, but we know that we still have some difficulty. But anyway, we also learn together how to cope with the situation, how to fit ourselves with the virtual modality, which so far I think we did a good job. And also I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for your active participation, for your strong support to the work of the Committee on World Food Security, CFS, and also to our CFS 47 plenary, which actually I think we have a successful outcome of the CFS 47. Especially, finally, we also adopted the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition. But the next 2 and 3 months, we have another challenge, because today is another special day that we come together to discuss the importance of delivering the policy recommendation on agroecological and other innovative approaches as a part of the 2020 to 2023 MyPal that we have all agreed to. And that's why this year we will have, as you know, that we will have the 3 CFS panelists, 47, 48, and 49. And also we will deliver at least 2 work stream, one on policy recommendation on agroecological that we are discussing now. Even though today we cannot meet physically, but with the leadership, with experience, with quality and abilities of the chair of the open-ended working group, Ambassador Yaya, he will lead us through the whole process. And finally, we will have the policy recommendation on agroecological and other innovative approach to be submitted to the CFS 48 special session in early June this year. And we hope that we will get your contribution, your strong support through this process. And now I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Yaya to tell us our goal today and also the next step, what we're going to discuss during his plan as well, that we know that we will have another big step ahead, but one that is necessarily as our ultimate goal is to endorse the policy recommendation on agroecological and other innovative approaches at CFS 48 special session in June 2021. And I wish you have a productive and fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much. Now I over to Ambassador Yaya, please.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, excellencies. Thank you for this opportunity to come together to make another wonderful contribution to our world and also to the millions of people out there that's hardworking, committed, and dedicated, but having us as their voices. And it's my pleasure and privilege to be given the chance to lead this rather very interesting, complex, convoluted, but at the same time, workable assignment that we have given ourselves. In other words, having a consensus on agroecological and other innovative approaches, policy convergence. I can assure you of one thing, that there is readiness and in fact, willingness from every quarter to make sure that we will not allow the negativity of our experiences to stop us from forging ahead. Whatever experiences we might have absorbed during the last few negotiations, my appeal is that we should make them stepping stones rather than steps of offense. Because this is a different assignment and it's important to all of us. So My appeal is a simple one. Welcome to another boat ride. Welcome to another flight. Fasten your safety belts. There may be turbulence along this flight, but one thing is sure. Let's keep a steady hand, focused heart, and a willingness to make history for ourselves and for our nations. We did not force this pressure on ourselves. COVID brought it about. Otherwise, we would have forgotten about this assignment way back. But here we are today. COVID or no COVID, we are still surviving and we will survive. So let's go into this meeting and see that in the end, we'll have a safe landing, which will bring us closer to our destination. In other words, getting people to be better fed with the right type of food, with respect to the environment, respect to our rights, and respect to others. So, welcome of this meeting is a pre-meeting to the actual negotiation. It's for us to rub minds and chart a path for a successful negotiation. First of all, we have on this document of ours two separate sections. The first section is said to be a preamble, and the other one is a recommendation. But before we go into that, how do we want to operate? What are the modalities? One, I'm sure we're all familiar with the CFS model of doing things. And in doing it, we know it's born out of mutual respect and inclusivity. Everyone, every constituency has something to bring to the table, and they must be respected. We may disagree, but in the long run, we have to agree on what will move us forward. The reason for the disagreements are not far-fetched. They will occur because of our different locations, different cultures, and different understanding of the subjects. But there's a common thread, and that thread is we are part of a bigger picture. I would want to suggest that all the lessons we might have learned in previous negotiations, which are positive, should be uppermost in our hearts. I also believe that experiences from failures will also be very helpful. And that too should be at play when it is needed appropriately. Now, let's look at a few basic things that are important to us. The schedule. We're going to start a negotiation officially from the 29th to the 31st of March. The second round from the 4th to the 7th and 10th of May. 4th to the 7th and 10th of May. This 10th of May has come up since 3rd of May was a public holiday for FAO. So it's a substitute for 3rd. Now, we need to produce a document that will be endorsed by a special session of CFS plenary tagged CFS 48. And the current timing is for the 4th of June. So if we can walk the talk, then by that time we'll be able to have one more endorsement to the way forward of doing things. Now, we have the timetable. This, I believe, must have been informed with respect to the amount of resources available and also the time available within the specification. Comments can come upon this later, but then that is how it is for now. Now, I intend to encourage us to do one thing. Time is always not our friend. But I want to say also that I'm going to propose that we're working between the official hours of, I think, starting at 9:30 every morning and finishing at about 6:30, I think. In which case, I do not envisage, and I mean this, any night session. If we can discipline ourselves by not repeating the old disagreements and focusing on say, yes, we know where everyone is coming from, and yet we have this assignment to do. So constructive suggestion as to the document will help us to move the agenda forward. We have only one draft one, and that is the basis of our conversation. A lot of work has gone into it by other segments, my predecessors, and so on. And you too, in attendance. So we will avoid night session. We will work within the hours prescribed for us. There's also the tradition of CFS and other meetings of the UN of having the friend of the chair or the friend of the rapporteur. If we need that, I want to assure you, I'm not going to be the chair. The friends will choose a chair amongst themselves. And the intention also is that the issues that needs to be ironed out will be done within reasonable time of about 1 or 2 hours per session. Now, maybe it will help if I explain to you why I'm not in favor of night session. It's because at the end of a hard day's job, your body system wants a rest. And if you flog it for night session, you are tired mentally, you are aching bodily, and you are irritant. So you are not going to hear what the other person is saying. And at the end, it's not usually productive. So let's use the energy we have during the day as best as we can. And from that point, we can go and have a good night rest, ruminate on what we've done, and move forward from there. So the chair, the friends of the chair or the friends of the rapporteur will choose their own chair as they deem fit. So let me stop here and hear you out, and then we can continue. Thank you. The floor is open.
Mr. Chair, just in the absence of hands up, perhaps you don't want to clarify. Do you want comments about the process as you've laid them out, or just general comments before we get into the text and the chapters?
Let's have both general comments and then the layout. They can all work together.
You have one hand up from the EU focal point. Kara.
Yes, thank you very much. Then I will start with the questions that we have. On behalf of the EU focal point, I will present an informal preliminary view from the EU and its member states. We welcome the new chair, Ambassador Olaniran, and we're delighted and grateful that you took over this task, and we wish you all the best for the upcoming process. You can count on our good cooperation throughout. We are pleased that you have organized this open working group meeting to discuss also the negotiation process. The EU has high ambitions for this policy convergence, and we strongly believe that a transparent, clear, inclusive, and participatory process is essential. We would be happy to receive further information today on the following points. First, what is the basis for the negotiations? Will it be draft 1? We heard that the CFS Secretariat is preparing a matrix as well, and it would be great if you could clarify which reference document we will have for the negotiations. Second, how will you structure the negotiations? Will it be paragraph by paragraph as in the recent negotiations of the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition? And third, regarding technical and scientific advice, it's essential that technical and scientific advice is available throughout the negotiations. And who do you see best placed for this task? Again, referring to the recent experience with the voluntary guidelines across UN agency, UN nutrition team was established to provide scientific advice. And in this context, we wondered who you would suggest, like experts from CGIAR or IPBS or others. And yeah, we thank you very much for taking these points into consideration and look forward to a fruitful and structured process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, EU focal point. Brazil.
Thank you, Chair, Ambassador Yaya. And thanks to the CFS chair as well, the secretary and Chiara. Thank you all for convening this meeting. I think it's very important for us to discuss before we start the real negotiation time, which is very precious and we should value. I would like to lay out first general comments on this process that we believe would contribute to a good result. Because we do believe CFS products are important tools to be used in terrain. They must benefit from the decisions and language crafted by the governing bodies of the RBAs. And from that basis, build up concrete guidance to final users. CFS policy convergence processes do not substitute the governing bodies of the RBAs, including the CFSs, where decisions are taken by the Bureau and ultimately by the plenary. Their voluntary and practical nature mean that policy products should not replicate discussions previously undertaken within the concerned governing bodies. If this happens, the immediate consequences are suffered by the product itself, which may lose importance, impact, or practicality. In this sense, Mr. Chair, as has been present in our earliest written contributions, we see with caution some recommendations, such as 2 and 3, which apparently mandates the CFS and the HLPE what cannot be considered a valid path. The recommendations are not intended to guide the CFS itself, neither the HLPE. This is the role of the CFS Bureau and plenary. The policy products are tools, agreed tools, which must reflect the greatest common consensus possible between all CFS stakeholders. Only this path will prevent fruitless and lengthy discussions, which in the end would only harm the policy recommendations. In this sense, Mr. Chair, it's not proper for this kind of document to have a list of definitions. It is a document for practical guidance. Defining concepts, it's not its proper function. And in addition, it would consume most of the time for negotiations without real benefits. To finalize, Mr. Chair, we have to point out the marginal role nutrition plays in the present draft. The present stage of the document brings a lot of elements, which most of them are not directly related to the mandate of the CFS, losing the focus of the recommendations, which are to be part of the struggle to combat all forms of malnutrition. And our message, Mr. Chair, and our aim in this process is that all of us together to build a direct and useful tool for change, not replicating conceptual discussions which belong to their proper governing fora. Only in that way, we will have an efficient and productive collective work. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brazil. Chris, I can see Russia. Or is there another hand before Russia?
No, just Russian Federation.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. Good afternoon to everybody. Speaking about the process, so dear Chair, the draft 1 of the policy recommendations on agroecological and other innovative approaches is a good basis for the first round of negotiations to be held in March later this year. We have already invested a lot of energy in this document, so we would like to reiterate our position on further steps that was expressed by our delegation at the last CFS plenary. We believe that member states and stakeholders should concentrate their efforts on the current document and its content rather than adding excessive new text. We are all aware of the process led to the endorsement of the voluntary guidelines on food system and nutrition, and let's try to avoid lengthy and repetitive discussions on controversial issues, as we all know the positions of each other. And lastly, Chair, the issue of translation. We hope that the official rounds of negotiation will be with the all interpretation services as usual provided by FEO and CFS. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russia Federation. Let me answer this question of, oh, sorry. Is there any other comment?
You have China and the CSM, sir.
China, the CSM. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, we would like to appreciate your leader in this whole negotiation process. And hereby you have our words from China Mission that you get a fully support of our side. We really appreciate your leadership and your wise instruction when you explain us how you will lead the negotiation process. And we also would like to echo the previous colleagues mentioned that we wish that this is a place just for negotiation to think about the better practice to help to promote the nutrition work and the food safety instead of create new terminology and definition, which is we don't think is a proper place for CFS to discuss. And we also would like to echo our colleagues from Russia. We totally agree. Let's try our best to avoid the too controversial issue, which is not that closely related to the topic of this draft. And we also wish that during the formal negotiation rounds, the multilingualism could be duly respected and the proper interpretation can be provided in all the languages. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, China. CSM, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, let me welcome you by the CSM as the new chair of this process. As you know, this process is very critical for the CSM, and we have been pushing for having the discussion and this negotiation for many, many years, because agroecology is so close to the life and livelihoods of many of the people we work with. So we want to get on this new train together, and we really hope that this will bring to a successful result. We will also want to thank you for this proposal on the modalities that you are proposing, because we think that it's a way to overcome some of the challenges that we had in the previous process. Of course, I mean, we would like to remind again that we work with people on the territories across different continents. And so again, virtual meetings, it's not really ideal from us. All the people we work with are not based in Rome. They are farmers, pastoralists, and food producers from different continent and time zones. So just to make clear that we'll do our best to give and to make this, to participate in this negotiation, but let's also consider that it remains a challenge. And also a challenge is the fact that we need to ensure, of course, adequate time. So it's true that we want to see a final product, but we don't have to lose the quality. The chair, you chair, know how the process on the voluntary alliance on land tenure was a success because of the capacity to really embark all the participants, also be taken up when they were endorsed. And we need to have this in mind as a final result, the quality of the decision that we'll use in our territories and in our work. We also like to just add a couple of further reflections in order to improve the next round. First, the fact that we all need to recognize the integrity and the mandate of the CFS. So the CFS builds on the expertise and the work of the UN agencies, but it goes beyond that, and its mandate is to elaborate and ensure policy coherence, and also to discuss and prioritize those aspects that are more relevant for the poorest in the world. So we don't have to lose this, as a more important mandatory role of the CFS. We also need to be aware that it's impossible to balance everything in the same time, in the same text. We know that we are approaching a very delicate, sensitive negotiation, that agroecology and other approaches are very sensitive, but at the same time, we continue to reiterate that it's impossible to put everything on the same level. So the CFS has always been recognized for its capacity to address also controversial issues. We don't have to be scared about discussing controversial issues, and we need also to build on what has already been agreed, but not stuck with that only, because we need to be much more ambitious, and we need to achieve something that go beyond what we have already achieved in the past. In terms of just technicalities, we want to echo that we hope to have interpretation for all the session, because this is absolutely important for us, and also to have adequate time to express all the different views, divergent views, and even if this takes some time, at least at the beginning, it would be important to have this flexibility in listening to the different opinions. And I will stop here, and thank you so much for the floor.
Thank you, CSM. Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente, y buenas tardes a todos. Le agradezco en primer lugar por haber asumido este rol y decidir brindarnos su apoyo para continuar con el trabajo que estaba llevando a cabo hasta este momento el embajador Emadi. Contará con nuestro apoyo en todo el procedimiento. Nosotros realmente creemos que esto es una discusión muy amplia que requiere el compromiso de todos los miembros para alcanzar el mayor consenso posible. Con relación al procedimiento, en primer lugar, agradecemos el curso de acción que usted y la Secretaría proponen. Solicitamos, al igual que los colegas que nos han precedido, que se prevea en la medida de lo posible la interpretación en todos los idiomas en las sesiones de negociación. Y si bien entendemos la necesidad que tal vez haya una necesidad de convocar un grupo de amigos en determinado momento, es importante que seamos realistas en cuanto a las expectativas del tiempo, porque en este momento están previstas 2 sesiones de negociación, y probablemente después del primer o segundo día de la primera sesión sabremos bien si van a ser suficientes estas 2 sesiones o no. Y si no son suficientes, sería bueno prever una tercera sesión de negociación en el plenario y no dejar gran parte de la discusión librada a un grupo de amigos, para lograr que haya la mayor participación e inclusividad posible. Esto con relación al procedimiento, presidente. También creemos que sería relevante no cuestionar entendimientos ni replicar discusiones que han sido saldadas en los órganos rectores de la FAO o en otros ámbitos. Sí podemos ser ambiciosos y es deseable que seamos ambiciosos en la medida en que esas propuestas no contradigan lo acordado en otros espacios y por supuesto tengan el mayor consenso posible. Con respecto a la estructura del borrador 1, que es el que estamos abordando en este momento y el que tal vez sea la base de la negociación, aunque como señalaron algunas delegaciones sería bueno tener un poco más de claridad al respecto, creemos que se podría mejorar la estructura. En este momento hay un preámbulo muy extenso, creo que esto fue fue ya mencionado en algunas de las consultas anteriores. Hay un preámbulo muy extenso en comparación con lo que son las recomendaciones. Son 5 páginas de preámbulo y 6 páginas de recomendaciones, así que ahí hay espacio para mejorar. Tampoco vemos la relevancia de tener un anexo con definiciones, porque sabemos que esto es un tema muy contencioso, y si hubiera definiciones acordadas sería una historia, pero muchas de estas definiciones no solo no están acordadas, sino que también son contenciosas y tampoco es este el espacio para definirlas. Y un último comentario con relación al enfoque de los debates que tendremos, que tal vez es una cuestión un poco polémica, pero no por eso no deberíamos abordarla. Y es de qué hablamos cuando hablamos de otros enfoques innovadores. Podemos decidirlo nosotros, si miramos al costado y miramos hacia otro lado y decidimos abordar este documento de una manera muy amplia, con muchas ambigüedades, por el solo hecho de no entrar en una discusión que ya hemos tenido, y entonces hablamos de grandes generalidades y dejamos librado al azar a la interpretación de cada uno qué significan estos otros enfoques innovadores, o podemos decidir definir, tener un entendimiento entre nosotros y definir de qué estamos hablando cuando estamos debatiendo. Porque tenemos que tener una base sólida para debatir, si no, ni siquiera sabemos de qué estamos hablando, agroecología y etcétera. Entonces, si vamos a mantener este título y vamos a mantener este mandato de elaborar estas recomendaciones de políticas sobre agroecología y otros enfoques, es nuestro entender que deberíamos definir qué son estos otros enfoques y tomar una decisión respecto a cómo hacemos que esto se vea equilibrado en el texto. Puede ser con subtítulos, puede ser utilizando lenguajes que sean aplicables a todos o muchos enfoques innovadores. Es una discusión que deberíamos tener y que consideramos que debería ser al principio y no al final, porque tenemos que tener un entendimiento y ser fieles y coherentes con ese entendimiento, que se tiene que reflejar en el título, se tiene que reflejar en el preámbulo y en las recomendaciones, que tienen que ser aplicables precisamente a agroecología y etcétera. Entonces, estos son nuestros comentarios preliminares, presidente, en términos muy generales. Nosotros hemos enviado ya comentarios específicos. Otro tema importante es ver cuál es la fuente o cuáles son las fuentes para la discusión. Entendemos que el informe del GANESAN es una de las fuentes de las que nos estamos valiendo, pero hay mucha literatura sobre agroecología y otros enfoques innovadores. Hay informes de IUCN, hay muchas fuentes de las que deberíamos valernos para hacer que este documento sea inclusivo. Encararemos este proceso con mucho entusiasmo, con mucho compromiso y con la flexibilidad que se requiera para poder alcanzar un compromiso y un acuerdo entre todos. Gracias, presidente, y gracias, colegas.
Thank you so much, Argentina. Colleagues, let me make 1 or 2 remarks, and then I'll defer to the Secretary for a detailed explanation. With respect to technical and scientific expertise, we have a team, a focal technical team appointed by the RBAs, and is inclusive of the CGIAR. CGIAR, for me, is the creme la creme when it comes to practical research and work in the field and experiences gathered across the globe, working on different crops. So we are in very safe hands here. But like the coronavirus thing, we may need to listen to the science on one hand, but also to listen also to the practicalities that are coming out of the field. So I think we're well equipped to get that done. Also, I want us to appreciate one thing, that all of us have been part and parcel of this process up to this point. And we should not forget the amount of intellectual input, time input, energy input, the political discussions that we have heard amongst ourselves, besides the technical one. The HLP report is key, and then my secretary gave me one terminology that I'm bothering my head about, is the triple T or T's. Maybe he'll explain that. Now, finally, I think Argentina made a point which we should also agree as to how we want to handle it. Agroecological approaches is one half of the equation. Other innovative approaches, she's calling for a definition or a common understanding of what those may be. And I think if we probably put that up first, then we'll be on the same page, at least have an idea of what we're talking about. To save time, Chris, I hand over to you to fill in the gaps.
Okay, thank you, sir. Let me start with the first question, or the last question you asked. This a TTT, which I sent to you in a text, refers to a technical task team, which is the common parlance we use for the expert groups assembled to amongst the advisory group membership. They typically include experts from the 3 Rome-based agencies, from the CGIAR, and often CSM and PSM. So that's the first answer to your question. Would you like me to answer some of the other points raised earlier, or do you want to go to the 3 hands up first? I'm at your disposal, Mr. Rapporteur.
Let's have the discussions, and then we'll ask the next 3 to come in.
Okay, you have the United States, Senegal, and the CGIAR system.
Okay. US, Senegal. Okay. Let's have them. USA, you have the floor, followed by Senegal and CGIAR. USA.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate your leadership in this process and look forward to your guidance in finding consensus. We support our colleagues in a number of their elements in their interventions. As Russia, Brazil, and China stated, we should focus on the areas where we have the greatest expertise, on the areas which reflect the greatest possible consensus between all CFS stakeholders. This will prevent endless debates and lead to a better document in the end. We also agree with Brazil and support the deletion of recommendations that task the CFS and the HLPE with specific actions, that is recommendations 2A, 2F, and 3W, as the role of the CFS Bureau and the CFS plenary, and falls outside of the mandate for this group. We would also support deletion of the annex, as this is a document of practical guidance and defining concepts, as many concepts as appears in the annex is outside of the scope of the document. That said, we sort of agree with Argentina that we may want to have greater clarity, not just on innovative approaches, but on agroecology as well. The HLPE report talks about agroecology as a science, a set of practices, and a social movement. Which description we use here in the policy recommendations has recommendations for what the recommendations actually say. And so maybe a discussion on how we are to understand the term would be beneficial. We also agree with the CSM on the need for sufficient time for negotiations in order to produce a quality final product. We share Argentina's concerns about the potential time constraints. While these are policy recommendations, which are typically shorter than the voluntary guidelines, I believe these are the lengthiest policy recommendations that CFS would have ever produced if all the current text in draft 1 is maintained. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you, USA. Senegal, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I wanted to first congratulate you for chairing this work stream. And I am confident that with your leadership, we will come up at the end with a very relevant document and through a negotiation that is very productive. About this, I have some point that I would like to underline regarding the process. First of them is, of course, it is said that we want an open and inclusive process. We feel that it is like that till now, but we will need it more and really very open, participative, and inclusive process. The second is we would like to call for all participants to a real spirit of negotiation, which means accepting to make some proposals, but also accepting proposals that comes from other members. The third point that I wanted to underline is the importance to have interpretation and timely translation of the documents. We will be able to work more correctly if we have interpretation through all the negotiations, and also the document to be translated at the right time. Fourth is about the content of the document. Of course, till now we have a very good beginning. It is a good document in which we can build, but please let us have an ambitious document. That means we have time to work deeply, to work it more and try to have any relevant input inside this document. So we would like to have really an ambitious document which take into account all the inputs from members and other constituencies. I will end with really supporting you, Mr. Chair, for promising you that we will do our best through this process to support you for your task to be easier. And we will hope that you also will help us in the best of your possibilities to have all our requests that we have already said ensured: interpretation, openness, and ambitious process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senegal. CGIAR.
Thank you, Ambassador, and welcome back to this leadership role. We look forward to your diplomatic skills and moderation as we advance this process. And also thanks for your comments about the CGIAR. We hear what you say. One point, I think, thinking of your very much concerned to avoid nighttime sessions is that we really should draw on those dialogues and open sessions we had with your predecessor, Ambassador Emadi, last April to last June, which, as a number of speakers have said, pointed out where disagreements lie, or likely disagreements. And indeed, those long discussions, very useful discussions, I think pointed the way to minimize the challenge to your blood pressure as we negotiate some of those sensitive paragraphs. For example, the definitions, and I hear what the delegate of US just said there, quoting the complexity of the agroecology definition. And I quote another bit, again from the HLP report, that there's no definitive set of practices that could be labeled as agroecological, nor clear consensual boundaries between what is agroecological and what is not. Now, one of the big discussions we had last May was whether categories of environmental sustainable approaches could be employed. And most of the participants said it's not useful. Some said it was useful. But I'm very impressed also that our delegate from Argentina just then referred to the IUCN paper, which regrettably came out just after those sessions we had with Ambassador Emadi. It was July last year. And that document, remember colleagues, IUCN is the world's largest environmental network, and they have a high profile in the climate change discussions, the biodiversity discussions. That paper was called Sustainable Agricultural Approaches, Exploring the Pathways Towards the Future of Farming. And that included a much longer list of sustainable agricultural approaches that are referred to in paragraph 10 here. Paragraph 10, Ambassador, is one of those paragraphs that we need to sweep away because it's unhelpful. But that paper from IUCN gives a very balanced view. By the way, IUCN are supported by France, Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, US, Korea, and that particular paper supported by the government of the Netherlands. Very worthwhile. And I think that should be in the reference list at the foot of that page and get us out of some of the unhelpful discussions of what is agroecological and what is not. So I just offer that as an opening comment. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Rodney. PSM, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good afternoon, colleagues, and good morning to colleagues elsewhere. Ambassador, on behalf of the PSM, we're very pleased to have you chairing us through this process. We have listened closely to your proposed methodologies and timings, and we fully endorse and support those, and looking forward to working with you and others in what has already been described as an ambitious agenda. And if I may, I will just go back to how we all discussed that ambitious agenda at the CFS in 2017, when we all, having worked together to put forward the MyPow for this work stream, went forward to the HLPE and requested them to prepare that report. I'm going to quote here, on the potential contribution of agroecological and other innovative approaches, practices, and technologies to creating sustainable agricultural food systems that contribute to food security and nutrition. And indeed, we went on, Ambassador, to ask the HLPE to consider the trade-offs that will need to be made by policymakers, farmers, and other stakeholders when considering the adoption of the different approaches. So we are very much looking at these different approaches. We are very much looking at the trade-offs for sustainability, economic, environmental, and social, and what are the best approaches to contribute to food security and nutrition. And I would join what both Argentina and my colleague from CGR have just said. There is a lot of documentation, for example, the IUCN report, which gives a very good overview of these different type of approaches that we should be considering to more formally reference in the document. I just have one further technical point. We will be making further comments this afternoon as we discussed both the preamble and the recommendations. I just wasn't clear from the Secretariat if indeed a matrix of comments has been prepared or is being prepared. I know all the comments are posted, but will there be the matrix prepared as well? Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, Hungary.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Mr. Yaya. It is great to see you in that chair. The best person for that place. I would like to make just a few comments. Obviously, as the EU focal point mentioned, we don't have the final consolidated EU position, but I would obviously fully align myself what she said. And I would like to make the following comments. Much was mentioned about the agroecology and the definitions and also the other innovations. When we are engaging in that kind of discussion, my proposal and recommendation would be to add one single word in the title. And I think nobody could have any strong argument against that, and say that, and other sustainable innovative approaches. That's a very important element, and all the innovations that we take into consideration should comply with the requirements of sustainability. This is one important point. Another one is that when we are talking about the HLPE, I think it was the general agreement in the previous rounds of discussions under Ambassador Emadi. It was generally supported the idea that the HLPE is and should remain the main basis for further discussions. For the single reason that the HLPE reports in general, but in particular, this one is a compilation of all the scientific results that were available at that time. Obviously, new scientific evidence is always welcome. And as the distinguished delegate from the CGIAR mentioned, it could be enlarged and some further ideas could be taken into consideration. That's most welcome. In this regard, I would only emphasize the need, again, to insert one single word before science. It should be neutral science, not science financed by someone, but neutral science. That's a key issue. And when we are talking about the new scientific evidence, my last point is about the need to understand the advantages and disadvantages of the different food systems. For this, we have available very good evidence from various scientific sources, including those applied by FAO, IFAD, World Food Programme, WHO, and UNICEF when they prepared the SOFI 2020 report. That report speaks about the so-called externalities, the hidden costs of the various food systems, and they quantify it. So we need to pay due attention to quantifying the externalities, both the positive and the negative externalities of the various food systems. That would help us to understand to what extent one specific food system is good for the environment, good for the sustainability, or what are the food systems that are not so good and perhaps imply some so-called hidden environmental and social externalities, which are very well quantified in the scientific research. So my recommendation is to pay due attention also to these scientific results when we speak about the need to pay attention to science. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Hungary. Colleagues, I think we spent quite some time on the process, but I know there are still some outstanding comments that should be given to members. I'll call on the secretary to handle some of them, like what the EU is asking us, the comments by the United States, which is a sort of summary of key points raised by Brazil, Russia, and Argentina. Before we go into the main conversation, which is where some of these points are, we will need to also get one fact straight. And I'm glad I'm being educated with regards to what had happened under the former able chairperson for this exercise, Ambassador Ahmadi of Iran. If it's been discussed and agreed that we should use the HLPE report as the backbone of this negotiation, once it's agreed upon, let us make it central. But that does not preclude bringing in any other information that will help us to come to consensus. So I just want to flag that. Chris, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur, and also thank you to the team behind the scenes in the Secretariat working to support you, support this process. Some of you know Chiara and Georgia, but others as well. So this is, as always, a collective effort. So there were questions asked about the basis for negotiations and the process by which we will commence, that you, under your leadership, sir, will commence. As we discussed, we understand that the March meetings will start with a section by section. There are 5 sections of recommendations. We will proceed with those in order and come back to the preamble, which may in fact allow us to streamline that preamble to reflect where the consensus is coming to a head on those 5 sets of recommendations. So there were questions about the matrix, which we typically, as the Secretariat, do for ourselves with the support of the process lead and consultants where appropriate. We will have a matrix for ourselves, and we will post it on the website for anyone else to benefit from. That will be an internal document, not a negotiating document, but it will collect for everyone's ease of reference the documents, or comments rather, that we receive from all of you. And so I will remind you at the end of this meeting, we will also welcome any written comments from you that you would like to share from this meeting, either the basis of statements you've read or simply additional comments that you would like to share, and we will post on our website. I've answered the question about a technical input, and sir, I understand, as with your colleague who led the voluntary guidelines negotiations, Ambassador Hugeveen, that technical expertise will be solicited from those participants, including members of the RBAs and the CGIAR system, who, at your request, would be able to provide answers or questions, or answer questions, or propose suggestions that reflect the cutting edge of what we know, whether that's the HLPE Report 14, the IUCN report that our colleague Rodney mentioned, or other resources. So a number of you focused on the interpretation, Russia, China, Argentina. We, as we always do, have the interpretation planned for formal negotiations in FAO's 6 official languages. It will not be a formal negotiation session absent the interpretation. Friends of the Chair is different. They will be conducted in English, and those meetings will be informal. So that answers that question. Now, on translation, we know, because of the constraints imposed upon us collectively, CFS, with the meetings that we had last year, that the meetings we have this year, that we are working within very strict constraints. To schedule anything on the Rome-based calendar, we require the Rome-based agencies to support and find time that does not conflict with other governing body meetings. So that means we would require considerable flexibility from you, and it may mean we have the shorter time frames for translations of documents than we would normally or otherwise and ideally have. So again, on behalf of the CFS Secretariat, we request forbearance and patience of all of you to make sure that we get you as fast as possible translated documents, but of course we have to rely on the Rome-based agency resources that we depend upon. So that is just a general call or reminder about the administrative constraints that we are all working with. Additional meetings and negotiation sessions are not foreseen at this time, of course, depending on the rapporteur and what he would like to pursue based on the progress of negotiations in March and May. We would potentially look into other options. But right now we have a fairly limited number of days and hours. And so the Friends of the Chair process will likely be an important area for resolving some outstanding questions. So there are other issues raised about the definitions. And of course, that's the Chair's prerogative once negotiations begin, or the rapporteur's prerogative. On the mandate and whether or not there are, this process simply relies on agreed text in other agency and governing body fora. I think that is a philosophical debate that goes on every time we have a policy convergence process. It raises the question of whether we simply are repeating text elsewhere, or that the CFS has a mandate that is different than individual agencies. And in fact, many argue that the strength of CFS is just that it is a collection, a platform by which variances in approaches and text can be worked out. So we certainly would expect, as we always have over the last 11 years, controversy and debate. So to the US, who wants to avoid contentious debate, I don't think that is likely or possible, but that is the Chair's prerogative. So if that answers the questions on process, I think, Mr. Rapporteur, you wanted to go through the text. Back to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Any other pressing point about the process before we move to the next stage? Russia? Is it old hand or new one?
No, this is the new one, Chair.
Okay, let's have it.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to ask the question for clarification to our Secretary. According to his explanation, we will start with the 5 sections of the document. But in my view, there is 7 sections of the document. First is preamble, then 5 recommendations, and then the annex with definitions. I just want to be clear and ask for clarification whether we'll start with the paragraph 1 and continue or not. And just just one point for clarification from our delegation. It is not only US that would like to avoid contentious issues to be discussed. So we also would be pleased to avoid this situation. And about the CFS mandate and what is CFS? CFS it is not an individual agency. CFS, according to the reform document, is a committee in FAO, and the mandate is described in the reform document, and I hope that we will not go beyond this mandate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation. I think you are right to say we have 7 sections, if I could speak for the secretary. And there should be no controversy about that. Before we really leave this issue, we may need to define a few things. And I don't want us to lose sight of it. One is the issue raised about the definition of other innovative approaches. My text, my information, based on the HLP report, points to para 10 of the preamble, which coincidentally, CGIAR is actually asking us to throw out. It may be a tall order, but as rapporteur, I want to hear your views, and then we see how we move forward from there. So could I have your views, short, straight to the point, and then we can now open up the next stage. Yeah, CGIAR, you have the floor. CGIAR. Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador. Just to clarify, I didn't mean throw out the whole paragraph, just a reference in it to those 7 or 8 approaches, because the HLP report included reference to many more than listed there. That list there derives from Appendix 1A in the HLP report, which is a subset. And I raised why they just singled those out with the HLP authors a year and a half ago, and they said it was for illustrative purposes. They could have included a much longer list, as for example, the IUCN paper does. And I take the point the distinguished ambassador from Hungary, we're only interested in sustainable innovations, and that also applies to the IUCN list. And the IUCN make the point, as does the HLPE, that there's a great deal of overlap between these umbrella terms. The reason I said it's unhelpful to include them here is simply a reflection of the long debate we had in dialogue number 3 on the 27th of May under the leadership of Ambassador Ahmadi, which said, that appendix at one stage said, can we distinguish between sustainable agricultural intensification and agroecological approaches? And the majority of the people in that dialogue said it's not very useful to try and do that because they overlap so much, such as, for example, climate smart agriculture, sustainable agricultural intensification. Most of the techniques and approaches within those very broad terms also apply to many of the techniques which are described in agroecology. And that's the simple reason, Ambassador, I said, keep the paragraph, but cover it with reference not just to HLP, but also to the IUCN, because those people have a very loud voice in what is environmentally sustainable. Thank you very much for permitting me that clarification, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well appreciated. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to support the comment of the CGIAR. We certainly read the OUCN report with interest following the discussions last year, and we think it adds a lot of value. I think if we get stuck on debates between the different approaches as happened last year, I think the time that we have for these negotiations is clearly not going to be enough. It's not about avoiding difficult discussions. It's about looking at the outcomes we want to achieve and the range of options for sustainable agricultural approaches that can be used by different countries in different contexts. So I just wanted to fully support the comments. OUCN report is not the only report. There's plenty of other material that the HLPE has picked up on already, but we're going to focus on the best available information that we have, and I'm glad that the CGIAR is part of our advisory group for making sure that we're referencing the best available information. In terms of the process, I am slightly worried that we aren't going to have enough time. I certainly, after coming through the food systems negotiations, I certainly sympathise, having sat in many late night sessions, that sometimes our time was not best used and it did get quite emotive, but I guess that's the nature of the discussions we're having. If we do have a friends group, which I suspect we will, and it is going to be led by a member country, I think that will be sort of interesting to see how that's managed. I guess given the sensitivities and some of the issues, you'll have to work out how to do that in a way that that sort of maintains some level of independence that everyone's comfortable with. And of course, we won't have interpretation for those sessions, but I think we'll just have to manage the best we can. But I think commenting on the process is a little bit hard at this stage because it's a little bit unclear how many red line issues we currently have. I think a few of them have been raised already today. Clearly this definitional issue and how we manage that section is going to be key. And once we've sorted that out, I think a lot of the other parts will be able to be managed carefully and a lot faster. So the matrix will be useful to see where these points are and members being clear on what their really biggest issues are so that we can try and be efficient. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, New Zealand. Okay, so let's move to the next section and have a go at it. I agreed with the Secretariat that we should look at the content, probably for the recommendations, in a broad sense, general remarks, and that will, on the long run, help us to streamline the preamble, which, as some members have indicated, seems to be rather long. It can be made more precise without losing quality. I hear that very clearly. Quality on the long run is critical to what we want to achieve. And of course, to be able to use it in practical terms. So the floor is open. CSM, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, because I raised my hand before, so my comments are in between of what we had just discussed and maybe can be helpful also for this new item. But just to be clear that as we are embarking in new process and have to take a new train, we also want to start with the in the right way, because we have the feeling that we are preempting a bit maybe the negotiation when we want just to decide if adding or removing parts of the text. We think that this is something that has to happen during the negotiation. We would also like to remind the history of this process, that since the beginning, the proposal was to have a discussion and a process on agroecology, and then the pressure for having a broader focus, including other approaches, was taken, and this created also a bit of confusion at that time, even in the approach of those in the HLP that had to address the issue. But somehow it was dealt with. We have now an HLP report on agroecological and other innovative approaches. But if we continue to expand, we risk to lose the focus, which has to remain on agroecological approaches. Along with this, we continue to say that the CFS built on the knowledge and expertise primarily in this convergence process of the HLP. So if we want to add other sources, we also need to be quite clear of which criteria we want to use, because there are many reports outside, and the role of the HLP is exactly to take all the reports or the knowledge outside and to assess and to provide the evidence-based knowledge for the CFS convergence process. So we continue to repeat that HLP has to be kept as the central and fundamental source for this report and for this process, sorry. And another quick comment is that it's not about just listing the approaches. What the HLP did in his report is to assess how much these approaches contribute to food security and nutrition. And this is where the HLP come up with its evaluation about how agroecology is able to respond to the multiple challenges, and other approaches might be sustainable from one aspect to another. But again, all of this, we think that it should be the substance of the negotiation process, and it's not really here at the moment and the place on starting debating about this. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the floor.
Thank you, CSM. I beg to disagree with you, because we have not started the negotiation. This is pre-negotiation discussion. And the main issue we have to deal with will be in the negotiation. But as chair or as rapporteur, I don't think it would be right for me to just wave away a suggestion from a center of excellence that are part of our technical team. And I asked that question from the point of ignorance, and it has been explained. And I'm much more comfortable with it now, where we don't have any reason to unnecessarily expand things which will add to the more confusion. But that explanation turned out to be quite useful. And in fact, to emphasize that even the HLP report made reference to it. So we are covered. Argentina, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Nuestra manera de ver, digamos, la necesidad de tener una definición clara sobre este tema surge un poco de cómo está redactado el preámbulo actualmente. Y sí recordamos, como bien señaló el mecanismo de la sociedad civil, cómo se originó este proceso, ¿no? Recordamos que inicialmente se pretendía que hubiera un foco o algunas partes pretendían un foco especial en agroecología, mientras que también hubo una solicitud de que fuera más equilibrado e incluyera otros enfoques. Pero actualmente parece que en ese esfuerzo de tratar de incluir todo, no queda claro de qué estamos hablando. Si efectivamente estamos hablando solamente de agroecología, entonces todas las demás innovaciones son innovaciones para la agroecología o innovaciones funcionales a la agroecología, como se infiere en el párrafo 6. De hecho, la última oración del párrafo 6 señala que la agroecología es sumamente valiosa por su aporte a la sostenibilidad y que otras innovaciones, principalmente las agroecológicas, también son valiosas. Entonces, no queda claro de qué estamos hablando. Cuando se agarra ese párrafo, no se entiende si lo que estamos haciendo al ampliar esto a otras innovaciones es efectivamente ser abiertos e inclusivos de muchos enfoques sostenibles, porque sí es muy importante lo que dijo el embajador de Hungría, de hablar de enfoques sostenibles. Las innovaciones pueden ser aplicadas de una manera sostenible o no, por lo tanto eso también es importante. No queda claro si estamos hablando de eso o si estamos hablando solo de agroecología con distintos nombres. Y asimismo el párrafo 10, que de alguna manera no tiene mucha coherencia con el párrafo, con esa oración del párrafo 6, lista una enumeración de enfoques señalados por el GANESAN, pero coincidimos con CGIRA y con Nueva Zelanda también en que eso debería ser más amplio, porque es mucho más amplio y ni siquiera el informe tal vez de IUCN llegue a abordar todos los enfoques sostenibles e innovadores. Entonces creemos que ahí hay que encontrar un equilibrio, porque si queda una ambigüedad en esto, en lo que estamos hablando, podemos hablar de cualquier cosa, pero debemos ser claros, porque si no vamos a terminar por agroecologizar lo que no es agroecológico. Entonces, vamos a terminar por meter en el paquete de la agroecología enfoques que no lo son, que no son agroecológicos, pero tal vez son sostenibles, valiosos, con grandes aportes positivos al medio ambiente, con externalidades positivas, pero no son agroecológicos. Entonces, no podemos caer en el riesgo de agroecologizar todo. Por eso insistimos con la importancia de buscar en el preámbulo una definición lo más clara posible, puede ser enumerando, puede no ser enumerando, sino describiendo, y que esté un poco más arriba en el texto, no en el párrafo 10, lo más arriba posible, porque antes de llegar al párrafo 10 hablamos de los problemas de la agricultura, hablamos de la pobreza, hablamos de COVID-19, y en el párrafo 10 definimos el título. Creemos que eso tiene que estar bastante al principio. Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Argentina. Could I make a suggestion? Between now and when we're going to have the negotiations, it may be needful for us to refresh ourselves with the HLP report and also make cross-references with other HLP reports, 12, 14, and in actual fact, for members to actually have some short synopsis of what we want. Not rewriting what has been done, but trying to put in some context into it. In the sense that what we want is that we have a foundational statement, a foundational document, which is not perfect. And we want to help ourselves to be able to come to what is near perfect. Because if we do that, then we will not be running the risk of repeating what we stand for, but rather using what we have and improving on it. So what it means is this, that we have a document that is imperfect, but we have it. What do we want to improve on it? So that is one way we can. And once we can be clearer in our minds, then the chances of unnecessary or prolonged debates at negotiation will not be there. We also have a lot of issues that we need to recognize. And that is, we've given the HLP experts a task to do for us. And like some members have described, they not only look at the sciences, but they also evaluated them in the context of CFS mandate. That is a key aspect of what we have on our hands. Because it's one thing to have the science, it's another thing to have the practice. But of what value will it be when we are trying to have a common policy outfit? And thirdly, there are 1,001 innovations, technological advancements, name it. But centrally, agroecology or agroecological approaches is our main issue. Other innovative approaches, from my simple mind, will not be just out there. It has to relate to improving agroecological approaches. A good example is this. In my village, the handset that gives a farmer information about weather, about the market pricing, will be far more important to that producer or that farmer than bulk chain or whatever heavy AI instruments elsewhere in another advanced ecology or advanced economy. So we have a broad spectrum which we want a niche into that is like joining the dots. And it's at the end of that joining that we want to produce something. So, shall we think about this? Any comments, please? You notice this?
For this discussion about what we're talking about, I think it could be useful to look at the MyPow that was agreed at CFS 46. If you look at the objects and expected outcomes, it says the objective of this workstream is to broaden understanding on the types of interventions, enabling policies and tools, institutional arrangements, and organizational changes that can enable and promote positive change in sustainable agriculture and food systems. In response to CSM's and Argentina's questions and comments about what we're talking about, it seems very clear to me this is what we're talking about, and it speaks to me that it's a broad, it's a lot. It's not just agroecology, it's not just innovative approaches, it's policies and tools, institutional arrangements, organizational changes. We have a big scope in front of us, as mandated by in our MyPow. On paragraph 10 in particular, we agree with CGIAR and New Zealand in their interventions. We think that, as CGIAR argued, the list provided is overly limited, and we think there is significant overlap between many of the approaches. We also have a different issue in paragraph 10. We disagree with the ideation of innovation that appears in the beginning of that paragraph. And the problem with us is that it sort of treats innovative approaches primarily as philosophical rather than as an iterative evidence-based process. So we'd be probably looking to expand the definition there to say that innovative approaches are informed by evidence about what works and is effective for farmers and creating sustainable food systems, something along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you, USA. Any other raised hands? Chris?
Mr. Rapporteur, you have a hand up from CSM delegate. It's the last only hand up.
CSM.
I don't believe Ms. Alvarez has heard you.
Buenos días. Me presento. Sí, soy Perla Álvarez Brites de Paraguay, miembro de la Organización de Mujeres Campesinas e Indígenas CONAMURI, y como tal integramos la CLOC Vía Campesina, desde donde también formamos parte del mecanismo de la sociedad civil. Como sabrán muchos de los que están presentes aquí, estoy integrándome recientemente en reemplazo de otro compañero que ha terminado el mandato, y quisiera, por un lado, expresar que para nosotros, para nosotras, para el mundo campesino, del que yo provengo, porque soy campesina, para el mundo campesino, indígena, para los pueblos del campo, es demasiado importante que en este debate, en estas negociaciones sobre este documento que estamos poniendo al debate, tengamos presente que el punto de partida debe ser el bienestar de toda la humanidad, y para que nuestra humanidad, nosotros y nosotras, las personas, los seres humanos, estemos bien, nuestro entorno y nuestro territorio también necesita estar bien. Entonces, esta cuestión de discutir la agroecología está intrínsecamente ligado uno con otro, tanto el bienestar de la humanidad como el bienestar de la naturaleza, para que podamos tener una vida plena con el disfrute de nuestra vitalidad con derechos. Entonces creemos que ese punto de partida debe guiar este documento, y en ese sentido de alguna manera coincidimos con la representación de Hungría cuando dijo que todo debe partir de esta cuestión de la sostenibilidad. Por eso nosotros y nosotras tomamos la agroecología, que recupera nuestros saberes ancestrales, incorpora los conocimientos académicos, pero por sobre todo el centro está en cómo convivimos armónicamente seres humanos y naturaleza, cultura, territorio, naturaleza, sin destruir. No podemos destruir el hábitat donde nosotros somos y donde nosotros producimos. Y esto vale tanto para el campo como para la ciudad. Creemos que ese punto de partida debe estar muy claro para todo lo que nos propongamos en términos de políticas públicas que los gobiernos deberían de implementar en la línea de satisfacer, de resolver la problemática global vinculada al hambre y a la malnutrición, que creo que es uno de los elementos que nos convoca a esta discusión. Para ello, la agricultura, con las prácticas agroecológicas, creemos que tiene la respuesta, por sobre todo, para resolver esa problemática y contribuir al enfriamiento del planeta, con el cual creo que mejoraremos nuestro medio ambiente. Entonces, en ese sentido, expresar que esperemos que este espacio sea lo más democrático posible y nos demos el tiempo suficiente para discutir. Si hace falta, sí, filosofía, pero que terminen siendo documentos prácticos de aplicación real en nuestros territorios, en los países, por sobre todas las cosas. Entonces, en ese sentido, auguramos que este inicio de negociaciones puedan servir realmente para resolver esos problemas más que centrarnos en las discusiones que nos lleven solamente a centrarnos en los lucros y no en la vida en sí misma. Entonces, esto, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. Well noted. Now, let me share this with you as part of what we have in the system, that CFS requested the HLPE, saying, although particular attention to agroecological approaches is envisaged in the HLP report, the committee recognizes that there is no one single practice for achieving food security and nutrition and sustainable and resilient food system. The role of agroecological and other innovative approaches, practices, and technologies in adopting existing knowledge and practices to specific conditions should be elaborated. This was CFS request to HLPE, which in a sense guided the HLPE to give us the reports that we have. If we are now suggesting that the specific condition for such an elaboration is inadequate, that is probably walking on very thin ice, which may lead to more prolonged debates and probably making it difficult to reach consensus. So my suggestion will be that HLPE has done her best. And on the basis of what they've given us, and we've had a consultant that worked through the HLP report, Miriam Avaneni, we have this and we should now improve on it. If we do that, then our discussions will bring us to a point whereby we'll be eliminating what could be contentious and agreeing on what we can, and then those difficult ones will be tackled. So that would be, in addition to what US has quoted for us with the work stream of CFS 46. So in the light of this, could we still continue to agree where we want to start this conversation from? Is it agreeable to start with the policy recommendation, fine-tune it, and then go back to the preamble to streamline it? Argentina, I think your hand was up.
It's PSM followed by Argentina. If they wish, they put their hand down.
Okay. PSM, Argentina.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the leadership that you're providing and guiding and facilitating these discussions. And I think we would support your recommendation to start with recommendations. That seems to be very logical. When we have been listening to this discussion, not only today, but over the course of the conversations we've been having, it's obvious that we're all trying to get to the same place, which is about outcomes, improving food security, ending hunger. And not only that, but using agricultural landscapes to address multiple other sustainable development goals. And I think it's important for us to really remain laser-like focused on the outcomes. And remember that there is no one silver bullet approach or tool to achieving these outcomes. Farmers need every available option because their circumstances are so different and so unique. We need to embrace and celebrate our agroecological tools, our precision agriculture tools, our regenerative systems, our conservation systems. Whatever tool in the toolbox can be deployed at scale, we need to be working them as a system so that at the end of the day, we're not just here talking about means to an end, but we're really focusing on the outcomes. So that would be our hope and recommendation, that we can continue to stay focused on what the world needs, which is attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, PSM. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, presidente. Solamente muy brevemente agradecerle por traernos la solicitud que hiciera el CSA al GANESAN cuando le encomendó el informe sobre enfoques agroecológicos y otros enfoques innovadores. De hecho, ese mandato que le dio el CSA al GANESAN fue cumplido con la elaboración del informe del GANESAN número 14, que fue presentado en 2019, en la sesión del CSA 2019. Consideramos que ese mandato ya ha sido cumplido. Y también agradecemos al colega de Estados Unidos por habernos recordado el mandato que el CSA se dio a sí mismo al aprobar el MAIPAO. Y ese es el mandato que entendemos nosotros deberíamos terminar de cumplir en este proceso. Es decir, es un mandato mucho más amplio, que no se limita necesariamente al mandato que le fue asignado al GANESAN, sino a todos nosotros en el desarrollo de esta línea de trabajo. Va mucho más allá de los enfoques solamente agroecológicos, sino también una variedad de enfoques, como bien señalaron algunos de los que me precedieron en el uso de la palabra, agricultura de precisión, agricultura de conservación, agricultura climáticamente inteligente, sensible a la nutrición y demás. Y creo que un enfoque más amplio, un abordaje más amplio, sería la mejor manera de poder ejecutar este mandato que nos dimos a nosotros mismos en el MAIPAO. Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Argentina. Should we have other additional comments? General comments on the recommendations, and then we can see where we go from there. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I think this session has been very useful so far in terms of capturing for you and the Secretariat some of the sticky issues that are going to come up as we get into the detailed negotiations. Just following up from my previous comment, I think, you know, there shouldn't be defensiveness about us undermining the good work of the HLPE. The HLPE are clearly a really important reference point for these negotiations and for these recommendations, as they are for other CFS products. But you know, HLP is never the only reference that we refer to. We refer to best available evidence, and we have the CGIAR as part of our team providing scientific best available advice, and they are also supporting that we need to look further than just the HLP. Just in terms of moving forward, I would also, I'm relaxed if we start going through recommendation by recommendation, starting in the second part, then I think we can do that now, or members can continue just to raise their biggest issues, and we can note them all down so that we can focus on knowing where all the most sensitive issues are, and maybe come up with a clever way of saving time by, with your guidance, Rapporteur, before we get into the full negotiations, maybe there's a way that we can document those toughest issues, and learning on how Hans was dealing with the food systems negotiations, which were very difficult. We could come up with some focused way of focusing on those toughest issues, so that when we come into those negotiations, we don't need a lengthy friends group discussions late into the night. I'm sure you've already thought of that, but just a suggestion from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, New Zealand. Well taken. So colleagues, let's follow that example and flag the paragraphs that you think need some careful attention. Russia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, but I fully don't understand what we're doing right now. We have the agenda. In the agenda, we have 3 agenda items. The first was about the process, the second about the preamble, and the third is about the rest of the document, which is recommendations. Please tell us on which agenda item we are now. And I just want to use this opportunity also to tell you, Chair, that on the agenda 1, my delegation asked very technical question, and we still didn't get any answer on this. So just to remind our colleagues from the CFS Secretary that there was no answer to our question. Thank you.
Russia, could you just repeat the question in case it got missing? Yeah.
Okay, Chair. During the explanation of Mr. Chris Hagedorn, he said that during the first round of negotiation in March, we will start with the 5 sections, and then we'll come back to the preamble. It was not clear enough for us why we should start with the 5 sections, or we could start from the beginning, from the document, para by para, discussing as we always do. We would be pleased if anybody could explain us what will be the first paragraph that will be tackled in the morning of the first day of negotiations. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Chris?
Sir.
Okay, Chris, hold it. I'll respond. I think I made an explanation earlier on when you were asking whether we have 5 or 7 sections, and I said it's 7. We have a suggestion, and it has to be accepted by the membership, all the delegates, how we want to go. Reading through the preamble, we believe that the preamble is rather very long. The recommendations, they are more straight to the point, even though there are areas that we still have to improve on. But if we could start with the recommendations and we agree on those, it will guide us in streamlining the preamble. And that was the reason why it's been suggested that at the morning of the negotiations, we'll go with the policy recommendations first, and then when we agreed on it, we can now go to the preamble and streamline the preamble. Now, it's a proposal from us. And in fact, it's the rapporteur's suggestion. So I'm putting it before the House. If that is acceptable, we'll go that way. If not, well, we'll go through the routine of preamble, then the main recommendation, and then probably the annex. My fear is this. Because of the time constraint, if we could work hard on the recommendations and we're able to agree on them, it will be difficult to streamline the preamble. Can we have reactions, please? Chris, would you like to share the experience about the RAI?
This, sure, Mr. Rapporteur. This was a process followed during the RAI negotiations, which I, of course, was not here for. So perhaps Kara would like to jump in and just to give a bit of a reflection of that experience, which the rapporteur has already described a bit of the logic of. But Kiara, do you want to reflect, share your reflections?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. No, it's a very rational thought. For the RAI principles, CFS RAI, we also had a long introduction followed by the actual principles. And we started with the introduction and we found ourselves stuck. And then we moved to the principles, and then we found that as we moved along with agreeing on the principles, we constantly had to go back to changing the introduction. So learning from that experience, we suggested to start with the actual recommendations and then align when the policy recommendations will have been agreed, it will be easier to go back to the preamble and align the preamble with the content of the recommendations. And it's very likely that the length and the content of the preamble will also be rationalized and streamlined. And it's also very likely that it will be shorter. So that's the thinking behind it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiara. CSM, you have the floor.
Sorry, can I have just 2 minutes, because we are consulting internally exactly on this question, because we completely understand that it's really critical to make a decision now. So sorry, just
okay.
I mean, go ahead with the other.
Any other comments? Chris, you can see the board better.
No other hand up. CGIAR's hand is up, and that may give time for CSM to consult.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Really, this is a question for the member states rather than the advisory group, how they want to sequence the negotiation. But what you and the Secretariat described seems to be very rational to approach the policy recommendations first. And I see in the chat that Mexico has already agreed to that, while others are cogitating on the rationality of your approach. So with that in mind, I was going to comment on recommendation 1, but I think I better hold that until maybe later that member states have commented that we should look at policy recommendations first. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
CSM has their hand up, but are not sure if they're ready. Mr. Chair.
Are you ready, CSM?
Sorry, and
okay, while CSM is still trying to consult, could membership please just let us know if they are agreeable to this suggestion? Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair, I take the floor just to support your suggestion. I think from what Mrs. Chiara has said, it seems to be a logical proposition. And Mr. Chair, my opinion and the view of my delegation is that any approach would be valid. I think the important for us is to have that clear before we start negotiations. We understand your approach is logical, and we do support it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil.
You have the US hand up as well.
USA, you have the floor.
We can also support your proposed modalities for approaching the negotiations. Our only concern is we want to make sure that there is sufficient time in the negotiations to discuss the issues in the preamble, as that is also important. In the voluntary guidelines negotiations, I think section 3.7 unfortunately received less times than other sections in the negotiations, and so we would not want to see a similar situation here.
Thank you, United States. We'll be careful not to stifle any part of the document. Russia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We can go along with your proposal to start with the recommendations. At the same time, we would like to ask you to consider to ensure the sufficient time for preamble part. We don't want to work in a rush. If there is a situation when we should work in a rush, our strong proposal will be to delete the whole preamble if we have only 1 hour, for example, for the discussion. So I prefer to directly tell you in advance these thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russia. Let me assure us, the intention is not to gloss over the importance of the preamble, but the intention is that because it's rather long and a conversation with the consultant emphasized that since the recommendations are based on the HLP report, most of the preambles are from the HLPE report. And we rationalize that, okay, they are important as recommendations. At the same time, the HLPE report is there for anyone who cares to educate himself or herself. So that's the rationale, but it is not intended to be an escape route for improper conversation and discussion of the elements of the preamble. But it will stem from our agreement on the policy recommendations, which we'll now use to streamline it. Thank you. Argentina.
Gracias, presidente. Nosotros también apoyamos su propuesta de iniciar con las recomendaciones, advirtiendo también esta misma preocupación de otros miembros, que haya tiempo suficiente para abordar el preámbulo, principalmente teniendo en cuenta que vamos a estar usando, entendemos que vamos a estar usando muchas fuentes, muchos insumos, además del informe del GANESAN, que por supuesto es muy valioso para la elaboración de estas recomendaciones, pero también hay otras fuentes, y que se construya en base a lo que logremos consensuar un preámbulo que sea aceptable y coherente con las recomendaciones acordadas. No encontramos valor en tener un preámbulo que copie o que se infiera directamente como un resumen de una fuente, de un informe, sea ese el informe cualquiera, sea GANESAN o cualquier otro informe. Creemos que lo tenemos que construir entre todos y apoyamos su propuesta, y por favor asegurándonos de que haya tiempo suficiente para abordarlo como corresponde. Gracias.
Thank you. Well noted. Okay. CSM, you have the floor, and then I'll go back to CGIR.
Thank you, Chair, for raising this issue. In our perspective as CSM, it's clear already from this very initial exchange that there are fundamental framing differences in the room on what this negotiation should address, and you know, the basic parameters, the basic categories, even the basic concepts that needs to be respected in there. Considering this is the case, going straight into the first recommendation, it's probably not very helpful, because it will basically upload and place all the emphasis of these differences completely unresolved at that particular stage on recommendation by recommendations. It's probably going to be a bit impractical and quite problematic. Our suggestion is to stick to conventional approaches that are well grounded in history and practice. These policy recommendations require a first reading. A first reading that literally starts at the beginning and reaches the end, not with the attempt of closing para by para, but just understanding the differences of views and perspective of the membership and other constituencies across the document. I think this would set out very clearly the differences and the different positions that members have across the document. We can try and do quickly without spending hours and hours on each paragraph, but I think this will provide an overall picture on the negotiations, and it now enables us then to contextualize each piece. If after this initial reading we can decide to focus on the recommendations, that could be fine, but that initial reading, including the preamble, is very necessary, because it provides the overall context of the positions which are out there. If we don't do this, we're going to start going deep with all these differences in the first line of the negotiations, and I'm afraid that is going to be a rabbit hole on which is going to be very, very difficult to walk out. So our suggestion would be complete reading, starting from the preamble, parking disagreements, and then maybe in a second round, when we begin to be more specific, and on the basis of that overall picture, maybe go into the recommendations. So apologies, Chair, for bringing a slightly different angle to what we are proposing, but it's clear that there's quite a wide diversity in the room, and that step is a necessary one in order to engage in the process productively. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, CSM. Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to Brazil, let me just say this. I don't see what you've just said as a dramatic departure from what we are trying to do. For me, I see it as an improvement on it. It's a procedural thing. We can read through all the document as it were, like you said, to give everybody a perception of the whole picture. And then thereafter, you can now go with the policy recommendation. So if we look at it as building the house together, then we will not begin to say my position, your position. From my own understanding, there's only one terminology here, our position. And that is what I want us to work on. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor. I was listening with interest on the comment by the CSM. I think they do have a point, but I'll just like contributing to our debate here, Chair. This document, draft 1, is almost ready for 1 year at this point. We have had previously last year 6 informal discussions about it. We had already lengthy debate. We probably all of us know our positions on many subjects. Although I do agree the point raised by CSM would be valid, but if the document was new, was something drafted recently, we all do know this document, and our objective to contribute to the debate and taking into account the short time we have for negotiations, I believe the approach proposed by you, Chair, would be more effective. And taking into account that this is a policy convergence process, it meaning we have to take into account the subsidies of the different reports presented and combine it with the guidance provided by the governing bodies of the RBAs. And this can be a very streamlined process, Mr. Chair, because as it has been said before by previous statements of other delegations, these policy recommendations are particularly extensive. They are longer than the previous works of the CFS. In this sense, Chair, I think we should have all that in mind, and especially that our time for negotiation is short, but it's not a lot short, because our goal here is to produce concise and practical policy recommendations and not to lose ourselves in, as I have said before, in concept discussions, which is not the work of this policy convergence process. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Brazil. Any other comments, please?
Mr. Rapporteur, you have the CGIAR system rep hand up.
Yeah, CGIAR, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'd like to make 2 points. First of all, before general observations on recommendations, slightly uncomfortable sentiment seems to be emerging that I was in any way diminishing the value of the HLP report. I think it's an excellent report. You may remember in those distant days when we had face-to-face meetings when it was launched, that we had long discussions with Sinclair, the first author, and Patrick Caron, the then chair of HLP, and CGIAR expressed its full support for a very wise set of analyses and discussions. But that work was done now coming on 2.5 to 3 years ago. Some of the documents we've cited today, such as the Major Environmental Network IUCN, was published last July. Now, if Sinclair had his hands on that, he would have extended Appendix 1A in the HLP report, because a lot of the stuff in that IUCN simply reinforces a lot of the stuff in our HLP report and extends it. So that's the first point. We're not seeking in any way to replace or criticize the HLP report. It's the basis of our policy convergence. Second point, I hear what member states are saying. Clearly, this is not the negotiation. This is opening comments to indicate broad areas that we may be able to accelerate the process of policy convergence. And I agree with your view once again that maybe the best way is to approach the recommendations first. Ambassador, if I may continue, I'll make a general point about recommendations 1 and 3, which is not negotiation. It's a question of sensitivities. And let me remind colleagues that recommendation 1 is laying the policy foundation for agroecological, other approaches, etc. And it has 2 italic indents. And the second one says, recognizing the need for context-appropriate pathways to move towards sustainable ag and food systems. And then there's the series of A to D. Now, colleagues, all of our discussions moderated by Ambassador Ahmadi emphasize that this is a hugely important point. That is to say, context-appropriate pathways. And I have to say that the rest of the indents in recommendation 1 and indeed recommendation 3 do not give adequate space to that hugely important aspect. And maybe just to conclude my intervention, the way in is to include an extra insert there, maybe between point A and B, which actually uses the language of another key HLPE document. That is to say, the document we looked at 2 weeks ago, Food Secure Nutrition, Building a Global Narrative Towards 2030. And we discussed that at length in CFS 47, day 1. One of the key elements in that paper, which would reinforce this recommendation 1 and 3, and I quote it to you, it's a paragraph on page 53. Let me just...
Hello. Yes.
Sorry, can I continue?
I'm sorry, please continue.
Okay. The key paragraph, Ambassador, is entitled, Take Diverse Situations into Account and Propose Context-Specific Solutions. And it reads, it's a short paragraph which would be very easily between point A and B in this recommendation 1. The shift towards more context-specific policies encourages more resilient and empowering food systems suited to particular situations and supports both productive and regenerative agricultural practices matched to different contexts. These efforts can help to promote equity and agency more effectively within local context. So Ambassador and colleagues, I think that that sentiment, and I just quote you HLPE to 2030, I think in between A and B would reassure many of the member states that made those points last year about the importance of context appropriate pathways. Apologies for being so long. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think that's a rather relevant suggestion, which Secretariat, please put in view. PSM, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to take the floor a second time. Just wanted to come back and God bless you, support the comment by colleagues from Brazil. We spent a great deal of time under your excellent predecessor, who had gone through the initial draft and picked out many of the contentious areas in the very, very first draft and set up those 5 excellent dialogues which we had, after which draft 1 was developed. So I think we're seeing already in the recommendations a distillation of many of the issues that were of concern to us last year. And I therefore feel that we are in a position, with the knowledge and experience of the discussions we've already had, ready to begin at the recommendations and begin to fine tune those recommendations before going back to the preamble. I do hear from my colleague in the CSM the concerns about going down the rabbit hole or the deep dive. There will be an element of that, but arguably we were down that same rabbit hole last June and July. and we were beginning to look at areas of consensus already. And if we go back and look at those papers, look at the findings and rapporteur's summary of those meetings, we will find a lot of guidance. And you, sir, have already said, let's go back and look at some of the previous HLPE reports. I would say go back as well, go back and look at the rapporteur's summary from those dialogues from last summer. There's a lot of value and discourse of what we had some very good discussions on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, PSM. More comments, please. General reaction or reactions on the policy recommendation. Russia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Could you clarify, are we at the agenda item 2?
Yes.
Okay, if so, Chair, I have a statement on the agenda item 2. Can I proceed?
Please carry on.
Okay, thank you. Let us make several observations on the preamble part of the document. So we welcome the addition made to reflect the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on agriculture and food systems. We also support the idea that HLPE report is used as background document and one of the major sources in our work. At the same time, it is important to take into account that we are developing our own intergovernmental document. So yes, we can consider HLPE recommendations, but it's not but it is also our common desire, should be our common desire, whether to use some of them or not. In our view, para 14, which gives us the notion of sustainable food system, should be reformulated in accordance with the definitions provided in the World Food Guidelines on Food System and Nutrition. It is not clear why we should we omit so many aspects of sustainable food systems, such as, for example, food safety and economic and social dimension of sustainability. And in particular, I'm referring to the paragraph 21 of the voluntary guidelines. We all know about this document. So next. Paragraph 4 also needs further improvement. For example, we have some doubts that all peasants in all countries and all people working in rural areas are discriminated and their human rights are violated. It is simply not correct. Then the statement in paragraph 15 implies that the policy recommendations are a human rights instrument, but actually this is not the case. Then para 3 contains some language that is not clear, like planetary health. And Chair, please let us know when we can make our statement on the agenda 3 of today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Any other comments, please? Please, you want the floor?
Just to clarify, you're looking for comments from any and all participants today regarding recommendations sections 1 through 5, correct? And the
correct.
And the preamble and definitions. Okay.
Well,
I don't see any other hands up, Mr. Rapporteur, but Russia did have a follow-on comment to add. Perhaps we take that and may even be able to wrap up a bit earlier.
Russia, please, you have the floor.
Chair, thank you for giving me the floor. I had some internet lost, and I don't understand why you are asking me to take the floor. Could you?
Because you had another statement. Since you are not having any other contribution for now on the general remarks with respect to the document as it were, we now say you could now make your statement.
Chair, yes, we do have another statement on agenda items 3, but I missed the logic of today's meeting. We are now at the second point, the second agenda item, or we combined everything in one. And Chair, sorry, but it is not clear. I'm not going to prolong the discussion, but maybe I can send in written after. But this is absolutely unclear for us. Thank you.
On item 2, the floor was still left open, and there was no hands up to take the floor. That's why I said, okay, you can go ahead. Make your second comment. But with respect to the seeming confusion about whether we are following it item by item, you have a point there. But I believe that in an informal discussion, it's not always easy to stick to just the demarcations. They run into one another occasionally. So if you will pardon me on that, then let's have your statement. And the floor is still open if anybody has comments. Because I'm surprised that in spite of what we are trying to do, we have so many pages, so many points that we could have some preliminary discussions before we get to the time of our negotiation. I have in my own notebook my different comments, but it's not for me. I want your input. And then it's with your input that both myself, the Secretariat, will be able to fashion something that will be agreeable to all of us. Rodney gave us a good start, good head start. So that's the way it is for now. So Russia, if you still want to make your statement, please go ahead.
And just to flag, the Swiss delegate has his hand up, as does the CGIAR.
Okay. Swiss and CGIAR.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rapporteur. Good afternoon, Yaya. It's a pleasure to be back with you again, and good afternoon to everybody. I should also confess that I'm a little bit lost with the meeting, but like you said, it's an informal meeting, so it's an opportunity to make comments on different elements of the draft one of the document. And we would like at this stage maybe to focus on paragraph 8 of the preamble, because we think this paragraph contains quite interesting information, which is not, which on one end was not reflected in the recommendation of the HLP report, and which is also not reflected in our recommendation. This is this reference of to the what they call in the report the set of principles shaping transitions towards sustainable food system for food security, which are actually presented in table 3 of the report. And based on this principle, the authors of the HLP report, they propose a set of 9 characteristics. So we think this is quite an important element because it really focuses on what we want to achieve with either agroecological approach or other innovative approach, is really to see how we can support this transition of this, what we call more and more the sustainable transition of agriculture and food systems. Another point we would like to raise here is a question of wording, but this is again something that came out from the HLP report. Here they are talking about principles, and this creates, of course, some confusion with the principles for agroecology, which are, I think, 13 principles of agroecology, which are also part of the reports. And I think it will be quite necessary at one point to clarify this and to really make a clear difference between the principles for agroecology and these principles or a characteristic to shape transition towards sustainable food systems. So we only wanted to use this opportunity to highlight these points that seems to us quite important and that could present a way maybe to solve some of the issue we are confronted, especially with this reference to agroecological approach and other innovative approach. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, my dear friend. CGIR, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador, and apologies for speaking again. I close with, again, general comments on the recommendations with a view to clarity or strengthening of them. And I refer this time to recommendation 3, which is support transitions to resilient, diversified, and integrated food systems. And the point I'd make here is similar to a point you made yourself, Ambassador, at the beginning, which is we should draw on other CFS products at the same time. And this 3 would benefit from cross-references to the voluntary guidelines, food security and nutrition that the CFS approved 2 weeks ago. Specifically in insert A here, it says raise public awareness about the importance of diversified production systems. Well, this cuts across immediately to recommendation 3.5 in the voluntary guidelines of food security and nutrition. And we could have a phrase or a cross-reference to that. Similarly, C, where it says provide producers with incentives to do the same. This cuts across recommendation 3.3 in the voluntary guidelines approved by the CFS just 2 weeks ago. So a general comment, Ambassador, that we can reinforce and clarify with some cross-references to other recent CFS products. So thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Other comments, please? Well, we have some 20 minutes to spare, but if there are no more comments, and since this is a virtual meeting, it's not too easy to communicate. If it were physical, we could have about 5 minutes break and then come back. I'll wait for another minute or 2, and if there are no takers of the floor, with the advice of the secretary, we might wrap it up. Chris?
Sir, no further comments from me. I recognize we do have some guests with us from outside our typical CFS family, and I think a helpful participation, since I see we have the lead of the Action Track 1. Lawrence Haddad, which of course a World Food Prize laureate. But I think the interest in this conversation is certainly perceived as an important process. And of course, the policy recommendations themselves will have some bearing on discussions within the summit prep and pre-summit. So I don't know if you wanted to ask them if they wish to comment. It was Lawrence plus the vice chair of the Action Track 2 was with us earlier. I'm not sure he's still with us, but other than that, we may be able to, if they don't want to speak, may want to wrap up a few minutes early.
No, I'll ask Lawrence to please speak, if even he doesn't want to.
I can't.
Lawrence, you have the floor.
I can't refuse you, Yaya, and Chris. Thank you for the floor. I don't have too much to offer to the conversation. Just to say, the reason I couldn't be here at the beginning was that I was in the open forum for Action Track 1 for the first hour of your meeting. So apologies for joining halfway through. But rest assured, these issues around agroecology and other kinds of innovations are front and center of lots of the game-changing propositions that Action Track 1 is producing, and I think more importantly, Action Track 3, which is around nature-positive production. We don't always call them agroecological approaches, but we borrow the principles very liberally. Indigenous knowledge, tacit knowledge, working with the most marginalized, worrying about underutilized crops, worrying about system resilience and risk minimization. So we use these principles a lot in agency of farmers, but we sometimes don't call it agroecological approaches. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This is words of encouragement for us to know that we're on the right track, and the name should not divide us, knowing fully well that what we are trying to do is being done and being practiced by a far wider population. Thank you once again, Lawrence. The Vice Chair of Action, Track 3, is it still here or is gone? 2. Okay, you have the floor.
Mr. Rapporteur, I think that was AJ Jakar, who I believe has since left the meeting.
Okay. Let me just make a quick observation and summary. Thank you very much for this meeting. And I want you to believe one thing, and that is, if it were a lot smoother than this, I would have been worried. And my reason for saying that is this, that this document has been worked upon by my predecessors, and all of you have gone through it over and over. And unfortunately, it has to be put aside as a result of other pressures, including COVID. And there's some level of rot that needs to be cleansed out of us. We have tried our best to the best of our memories, to recollect things and to move forward. We have also, in this first meeting, seen that we could follow the routine, as it were, but we could also innovate and reactivate things to give us the expected results. The timeline is tight. The Secretary has explained to us why it is difficult to get dates and time to have meetings when you put together the complexity of the RBA's calendar. We're also reminded that we have not only dealing with this particular report, but there are other reports, other conversation, other debates that are on as a result of the food summit. So there are many actions, many actors, and to some extent, they're also taking part of our own time. Now, when we look at the general principle, we can come to one conclusion, that what we are doing is important beyond the CFS. But we also have to work in a way that what we are going to produce is going to be an ingredient to the many other ingredients that are available for general use. I apologize for not being strictly a system person. It's a fault on my part, but at times it could be very helpful if you are flexible. I want a situation where, with some level of discipline, we can accommodate what chapter or what section of our conversation we are going into. And if it means coming back at times to make things better, yes. So I'll still appeal to my dear friend and colleague from Russia that maybe we still have the opportunity of that second part of his contribution, because we can't leave any stone unturned. Finally, I know 2021 is so many years after 2013, and many things have changed. But there are so many basic things that have not changed, including the agroecological activities, including the complexities of other innovations, and including the awareness, the serious awareness of other knowledge out there, that of the indigenous people, that of the quote and unquote so-called illiterate farmers. But if any of us will be honest, when you put down your PhD toga or the DSc toga and you sit down with these so-called illiterates and you hear their experiences, and then you line it up with what you've learned in the university, you'll discover that They are much more educated than you can ever think. What they're talking about is from patience, commitment, dedication over many, many years. And that you cannot buy. So dear colleagues, once again, I want to encourage us that we are one family. We will have cause to disagree, but we should not allow our disagreement to put us asunder, but rather to pull us together to build a final acceptable report that will be useful to the millions out there that are so hardworking. And in fact, they are still producing the bulk of what we eat, with all our complaint about their inefficiencies. Let's take advantage of all this to make our lives better, to negotiate policies that will help them to be more productive. Better lives than we have allowed them so far. The indigenous people are close to my heart as they are to your CSM. PSM, you made strides to begin to produce foods that are healthy and less of fatty acid and sugar. I do know that the best food is the one you harvest from the back of your house. But the world is so complicated now that you have to source other things to eat. So we will work together as a team, and that's my appeal. And at the end of it, we should be able to joyfully congratulate ourselves that we've done a good job. At this point, let me thank you once again for all that you have done. The metrics will come. The summation of our attempts today will be made available, and then we can fine-tune, getting ready for the next part of our discussion, which will be the beginning of the negotiation. But I want us to go into that with a heart of peace and joy. Once again, I want to encourage us that what we should do should be constructive suggestions to the recommendations, to the preambles, and using our experiences to make it workable. We know our different positions, we do know, but that should not cause a division amongst us. Rather, it should help us to build better. Brazil, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your words. I would just like to make a final comment, Chair, because something has been talked about the matrix. I would just like to record that if the matrix comes out, which I don't think it's essential, but nevertheless, it will be an informal document, and the basis document for negotiations is naturally the draft one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's true. In fact, I was opposed to making the metrics public because it's for internal use, really. But since it's been spilled out, it won't do any harm if we have it. But you are right, it's not going to be the basis of our negotiation. Draft 1 is going to be the basis of our negotiation. Thank you. Any other final comments? Okay, in the absence of any other comments, oh, Secretary, you have the floor. Secretary, can't hear you.
Okay, is that better?
Better.
Okay, gotcha. So just wanted to add a few points to clarify for housekeeping just before we close. The matrix, as pointed out, will be an internal document, but we will post it because we know a number of you find it useful just to have. We request any written comments from you from today's meeting to be emailed to the CFS Secretariat website, and we will post those on our working space on the website. The timing for the matrix, we will have that by I think conservatively say midweek next week. So just look on the working space under agroecological and other innovative approaches. We will help the rapporteur to draft a chair's summary of this meeting, but also an email that will capture the process issues that that we talked about today for those who were not able to join us today. We will plan on seeing everyone on Monday, the 29th of March, working from draft 1 as the basis of negotiations, which the rapporteur will lead us through based on his decision on the sections as discussed today. The Secretariat, of course, is at the disposal of the membership and the rapporteur, and we're here to make sure we do everything possible to help you in your work. Yeah, I love the note about taking this with a grain of peace and joy at the center. Also, I thank you for joining the Secretariat special event on the 11th of February. And if I'm paraphrasing, but I recall you saying something about how we all need innovations for better outcomes, and that we must align with nature, or nature will fight us, if I'm using your words correctly. So this is important. We know how the impact this will have on those working on the summit and the action tracks. So please let the Secretariat be of service to all of you. Over to you.
Thank you. CSM.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the floor. We are not yet clear if we are going to start with the preamble or with the recommendations, or maybe we just, yeah, I mean, if it was decided, apologize if we didn't get it, but we would like to know how we plan to start on the 29th. Sorry.
The membership agreed that we start with the policy recommendation. Okay. So I think we can say goodbye for now. See you on the 29th. Joyfully, in peace, and ready to do the heavy lifting that will give us the desired result. I'm sure we can make it. There's goodwill in the room. Thank you so much. Bye for now. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat, colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Arrivederci.
Thank you, interpreters. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.